Evening and welcome to tonight's Bible study. We have worked our way up to Proverbs 22, and we'll go ahead and read it and get started. It says, "A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is far better than silver or gold. Rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. Humility and the fear of the Lord brings wealth and honor and life. In the paths of the wicked lies thorns and snares, but he who guards his soul stay far from them. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not turn from it. The rich will rule over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. He who sows wickedness reaps trouble, and the rod of his fury will be destroyed. A generous man will himself be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. Drive out the mocker, and out goes strife, quarrels and insults and are ended, sorry. He who loves a pure heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king for his friend. The eyes of the Lord keep watch over knowledge, but he frustrates the words of the unfaithful. The sluggard says, "There is a lion outside," or "I will be murdered in the street." The mouth of the adulteress is a deep pit. He who is under the Lord's wrath will fall into it. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it away from him. He who oppresses the poor to increase his wealth, and he who gives rich gifts to the rich, both comes to poverty. Pay attention and listen to the saying of the wise. Apply your heart to what I teach, for it is pleasing when you keep them in your heart and have all of them ready on your lips, so that you may be in the Lord. I teach you today, even you. Have I not written 30 sayings for you, sayings of counsel and knowledge, teaching you truth and reliable words, so that you can give some answers to him who sent you? Do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court, for the Lord will take up their case and will plunder those who plunder them. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his way and get yourselves ensnared. Do not be a man who strikes hand in pledge, or put up security for debt. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. Do not move the ancient boundary stones set up by your forefathers. Do not see a man skilled in his work. He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men. This psalm actually starts what we call the 30 sayings that were written out. Today we will look at the first five. Proverbs 23 and part of Proverbs 24 complete the 30 sayings that is written out. These 30 sayings, interesting enough, have a parallel in Egyptian texts, the teaching of Amene Pop. And he has 30 chapters, but really they're just 30 sayings that he has on a little stone thing. But let's go through the Proverbs first, and then we'll get to the 30 sayings. And for the next couple weeks, we'll be in the 30 sayings. It start off with saying, "A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver." And I think that speaks volume for itself, where a person's good name is indeed more valuable than gold. I don't know if you've ever met a person who has wealth and is a clod in a sense, is undignified, say and do things that people laugh behind their backs and think they are stupid, and the only reason they put up with them is because of their wealth. And a person with a good name, people want to hang around them, talk to them, be their friends, etc. And that is far more valuable than silver and gold. But ultimately, what Solomon wants for us to know, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor as far as physical, material wealth is concerned. Verse 2 really clears that up. It says, rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. And so it doesn't matter what you have or don't have in this life. Realize who you really are. You are made by God in the image and likeness of God. And because of that, you are more valuable than you think. And I think we need to really communicate that idea to people because too many people don't realize that they are valuable. And it's not because they have money or wealth, but they are valuable because God is the maker of us all. And because he is our maker, and because he is our Father, and he's our God, and we are made in the image and likeness of God, it doesn't matter who we are and what we have or don't have. We are so valuable, more valuable than we realize. And far too often I see people, because they don't have material wealth, they think less of themselves and just don't care for themselves. And it really hurts for that. So the important lesson that we need to take from that is it doesn't matter who you are. You are valuable to your family, hopefully to your community, to everyone else around you, but most importantly to God. And it reminds me of the great commandment, which is love God, but the second is love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so good self-love is what we need to understand, is you're so valuable, you should indeed love yourself. Verse 3 then starts off with, a prudent man sees danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. I don't know how else to say this, is we really need to get some common sense, some good knowledge about the way the world works, the way everything works. And I don't think you need to be an expert in anything, but you really need to become smart enough in things to know, for example, how finance works. To get to know how cars work, to drive it properly. And the list goes on and on. But the important thing is to use your knowledge, your skills, your ability to, if and when you see danger, to not plow into danger, but to take refuge from it. Whereas the simple person, they just keep going and end up and suffering from it. And so knowledge is so important. Studying and learning different things is so important for us to have a good grasp. Otherwise, far too often we end up in trouble due to lack of knowledge, due to lack of just common sense. Verse 4 says, humility and the fear of the Lord will bring three things: wealth, honor, and life. And I want for us to understand that as Christians, because we are humble enough to trust in God, humility here is to truly see God for who he is, and be humble enough to accept God as your Lord and Savior, and to put your trust in him. If you put humility and prudence together, the scripture is very true. The first thing it brings you is life. The second thing it brings you is honor. And the last thing that it brings you is wealth. And let's talk about this in a real way, because it brings life for me as a Christian. Before I became a Christian, living life can be very mundane, struggling to earn the dollar, to eke out a living, to pay the bills, etc. But once you accept your place and humbly accept God as God, and you as his child, made in his image and likeness and valuable, it brings you to that place where instead of fighting against life and against others, you have life and you can live at peace with self and peace with God and peace with others. And it does indeed bring you honor if you then take up the thing and start studying and learning and being a person that gains knowledge and prudence, etc. And once you have prudence and knowledge and experience, you do get wealthier. I jokingly told the inmates once that being a Christian life is the best life because you're richer. And one of them looked at me and said, I don't understand. What do you mean just being a Christian mean you're richer? And I said, reality is the Bible is quite clear that humility and fear of the God of the Lord brings you wealth, honor, and life. And it brings you life. And I said, look at me. I'm a Hispanic male. And from my cultural makeup and background, etc., as a Hispanic male, the way we were taught to do is the man is the head of the household. He is the breadwinner. He goes out, he earns the money, he brings it home, he gives his wife so much. And the typical Hispanic male would then go out and have a girlfriend, go out and drink and hang out with his friends and spend the money. Some of them may have a second family and is supporting two families. But the moment you become a Christian and you realize that as a Christian, you are humble, you fear the Lord, you're committed to your wife and family, you start tithing and you start living according to the Christian value, so you're no longer doing those things. You're not going out drinking and carousing and spending money on another woman, other kids, etc. You have more money. And I gave them the example, if you just gave up drinking and smoking and take that money and invest it back to your family, that would be more money. You would be wealthier. And so that's what I think we need to understand is humility does, and being a Christian is the best life, for it brings health, wealth, and life. Let's move on, or we won't get to that part that we need to get to. It talks about the paths of the wicked lies, thorns and snare, but he who guards his soul stay far away from him. Then verse 6 is a very important verse for me anyway. I think as parents, grandparents, educators, church family, etc. Here's what this verse says. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Augustine of Hippo, or the person we know as St. Augustine, said, if you gave me a child by the age 9 or 10, if I can get to train them, they will grow up in such a way as to follow it the rest of their lives. And that is the thing. We need to understand how valuable those early years are for kids. From 5 and below, how valuable those years are. Unfortunately, because they're young and they're kids, we just kind of ignore them or turn them over to babysitters, or worse, to the TV, and they see and hear things that but as Christians, we should really take the time and effort to invest in training, educating. That's what this is all about. Educating our child in the Christian value, in the Christian lifestyle. And it is a shame today, unfortunately, that most churches, if not all churches, don't have Sunday school Sunday morning. And I want to repeat that. Most churches, and it doesn't matter, especially United Methodist churches, the ones I've served, no Sunday school. And it's a shame. It's a crime. Because if we would indeed take the time and effort to train our kids, to have them there for Sunday school and to invest the time and energy in them, especially as they are younger, and we train them, when they grow up, they will not leave it. And I know this for a fact. Not only did St. Augustine say it, but I see it with my own kids. My wife invested her life training our two daughters. And I am so proud of them today. But I'm also saw it firsthand that if you invest the time and energy to educate and train a child, not just education that the school system give them, but the Christian values and education, they will not turn from it. They will grow up and be good Christian people. And that's what I can say about my daughters. Enough of that. Let's go on. The rich will rule over the poor, and the borrower is the servant of the lender. Uh, what a verse. I know that Dave Ramsey quoted often, but verse 22 is the rich do indeed rule over the poor. And a lot of us had heard the golden rule. And for Christians, we think the golden rule is do unto others as you would do unto yourself, as you want others done unto you, or, something of that nature. But in finance, the golden rule is he who has the gold rules. In other people, the rich who have money make the decision and the rules of the game. And unfortunately, here's what happens, and this has to do with banking. The borrower is the servant of the lender. The borrower. So it's just that way. Picking up that same idea in verse 26, which is the third of the sayings, is do not be a man who strikes hand in pledge or set up security for debt. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. And what this have to do with is the way we deal with money. Unfortunately, in our society today, we finance everything. We finance our house, we finance our car, we even finance our daily living through credit cards. And the borrower is the servant, the slave, really, of the lender. And so here's what we have. People who are working, slaving hard day in and day out. Some people 2 jobs, both husband and wife, and they're basically slave trying to pay that debt back. And that's what it said. Don't strike pledge and put up security for debt and all this stuff. I could go on and on about this topic, but unfortunately, we don't have the time. And so I advise people, if you are having financial problem, call me, talk to me. I will show you a debt elimination system. I will talk to you and give you the advice. I was dirt poor, and I'm not the wealthiest person in the world, but financially, here's the thing. Most people in America, if they had an emergency, and I'm talking about $1,000 emergency in a given month, they're in trouble. Last month alone, I bought a dishwasher and an oven for my wife because our dishwasher went out and she didn't like the way the oven was working. And, it was like a bump in the road for me because I learned the discipline of money and finance and such. And so if you are having problem with this thing, be it Dave Ramsey, debt elimination, or something else, call me, talk to me. I will talk to you about how to do that and do it well. For I've lived it and I've learned how to master it. Picking up at verse 8, he who sows wickedness reaps trouble, and the rod of his fury will destroy him. Now we're talking about good Christian people. A generous man will himself be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. And I cannot stress enough about being a generous person. Jesus makes it quite clear, give and it will be given unto you. He makes it quite clear, it is better to give than to receive. And generosity is one of those things. And we as Christians should be generous with our things to the church and to others that are in need. I like verse 10. Verse 10 says, drive the mocker out, and out goes strife, quarrels, and insults are ended. If you have a person who mocks and is just a hard person to get along with, and I know you all know some people in our lives that they are just hard to get along with. If they aren't around, drive them out. If they aren't around, your life is so much easier. And I can tell you, growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there were lots of problems and issues. But here's the thing, as I became a Christian, I became friends with Christians, and I left my old friends behind. And it was not intentional. As I became friends with new people who were better people, that people who were not like me anymore, like an old garment, fell out of my life. And that's what we're talking about. Verse 11 says, he who loves a pure heart and whose speech is gracious will have the favor and friends for the king. We have heard this before about sluggards, the verse 13. The sluggards say, there is a lion outside and I will be murdered in the street. In other words, the sluggard give an excuse for not going out there to work. And y'all have heard me say this before. An excuse is an excuse is an excuse. Of course there are lions out there. Of course there's problems out there. But that's an excuse. We as Christians are not sluggards. We're hardworking people who do the right thing. And the sluggards give an excuse. There's a lion outside and I might be murdered in the street. The reality is we take our lives in our hands every day we get on the road. You could run into a drunk driver. You could run into, a problem. Just because there's problems out there does not mean that we hide under our beds. We don't. I believe the worst thing than an excuse is a good excuse. Of course, I think anytime a person give me an excuse, I said that's an excuse. That's what you believe. That's fine. Let's move on. Verse 15, folly is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. It goes back to that verse about train a child. Sometimes children don't want to do the work and they are kind of, I remember, and I know my youngest daughter will probably get mad at me if she ever sees this video. But I remember when she was a little kid, my wife was homeschooling her, and she would sit there sometime and look out the window for 15, 20, 30 minutes. And the older daughter would say, why don't you just get in and do your work so we can get out early and go out and play? And she would, I just need to sit here and look out for a while. But here's the thing. My wife was very disciplined, and it drove it from her. Today, she's a very hardworking, disciplined person. And the reason for it is, it says folly is bound up in the heart of a child. Of course, kids want to go out and play and do nothing else. But if we would, train them and discipline them, it will drive out that folly from them and discipline. And let me talk about this. And I want to be quite clear. My wife and I was once asked, because my kids always went to church on Sundays and always went to Sunday school. And we were asked, well, how come your kids come and how come they always come and how come they're happy when they're here? And we asked them a question. Do you give your kids a choice to go to school? Yes or no? And they go, no. When the bus comes, they know it's school time, they have to go. And I said, well, that's the same thing. As parents, we do not give our kids a choice about going to Sunday school or not. It was a part of our lifestyle. It was a habit. We always went to church and we always went to Sunday school and we always participated. It was a habit because it was a discipline. And of course the kids want to sleep in. Of course they want to do the fun things. They want to play, they want to do sports, they want to do... How many of us as parents have allowed our kids and sports and all these other distractions take over our lives, but we aren't disciplined enough to be in church every Sunday and doing Sunday school? I know I'm on my soapbox here, but I have to say it. It's so valuable for us not only to discipline our kids to go to public school 5 days a week, but we should discipline them to be Christian 7 days a week and to go to church every week. My two daughters still go to church every week because putting that one, verse 15 and verse 6 together, train a child in the way he or she should go, and when he or she is old, he will not turn from it. It was because we discipline our kids to go every week. And as parents, we did not give them a choice when they were little. So when they became young adults, they just felt that was the way things were. Switching off now to verse 16, it says, he who oppresses the poor to increase his wealth, and he who gives gifts to the rich, both come to poverty. And here's the thing, to get rich by oppressing somebody else to increase your wealth, ultimately, eventually, people will quit doing business with you and you will come to poverty. And if you give away your money to the rich people and try to impress them and keep up with the Jones, you will come to poverty. Okay, we have 5 minutes to start the 5 sayings that we have. So it starts off picking up at verse 17. It says, pay attention and listen to the saying of the wise. Apply your heart to what I teach. For it is pleasing when you keep them in your heart and have all of them ready on your lips. So I want to spend a few moments on this part. It says, pay attention, keep it on your lips, put it in your heart. This is not something you read once and you forget. In other words, this is something you read and reread and you memorize and you learn. And the only way I think you can learn something and it becomes a part of you is by having the discipline to study it and memorize it and learn it. So let's look at these things quickly. The first one, do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court, for the Lord will take up their case and will plunder those who plunder them. And as Christians, here's the thing, we never take advantage of anybody, especially the poor. And this is in the Bible over and over again, because ultimately God will judge us, but even in the here and now, God takes up their case. And if we do bad to other people, we reap what we sow, God will indeed pay us back in kind. So the first one is, do not exploit the poor. The second one, and I think this is such an important one, do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his way and get yourself ensnared. In other words, who you hang around with, and I teach this to kids, it's called peer pressure. Whoever are your friends and who you hang around with, they influence you. And influence, as I mentioned in a sermon a while back, and I re-mentioned here, it's very strong and it's very subtle. It's very strong because think about how kids are peer pressure. Well, the same thing happened to us as adults. Who we hang around with influence us. And the Bible makes it quite clear. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with them. So if a person is easily angered and so, unless they're a relative, a close relative, I avoid people that are that way. I mean, you just try. I know if a person is a mocker, picking up at verse 10, drive out the mocker and out goes strife and quarrel and insults are ended. The same thing here. Do not make friends with mockers. Do not make friends with hot-tempered people. Do not associate with people of ill repute and stuff. Or you may learn their ways because you are influenced by them. And then you get yourself ensnared. Okay. We already read verse 26. Do not be a man who strikes bargains, etc., etc., or you'll be snared onto them. And that is the golden rule. The rich will rule over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender. Verse 28 is, do not move the ancient boundary stones set up by your forefathers. In other words, back then they just had boundary stones, and then they surveyed the land and they set these stones up. And some people would move the stone and try to, it's called stealing. But here's the thing. Today we have, boundaries are surveyed and marked, etc., etc. But back then they would move the thing to try to grab more land and to take advantage of somebody else. The Bible clearly says we as Christians don't do those things. The last verse, and I wish I had more time. We're almost out of time for tonight. And let me read it slowly. Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men. And the point here is, if you are good at what you do, a person who is skilled in his work. And my advice to people is to become an expert in something. I know I have talked about expert is X is something you can do without, and expert something that leaks out under pressure. But I think Elon Musk, the head of Tesla, said anybody can become an expert in anything. And here's the way you do it. It's called read enough books on that particular subject. And so the Bible says, do you see a person skilled in their work? If a person becomes an expert in something, be it in piano, in things with their hand, they will serve important people and they will not serve unimportant people. And I think that as Christians, here's the thing. We all have the same amount of time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't care how young or old you are. We all have the same amount of time. The question is, how do we use our time? Do we become more knowledgeable, more skills, an expert in something? For example, I became an expert by studying the Bible and learning more and more. I studied Greek and Hebrew and Latin and German and Spanish, all in order to become an expert in the Bible. And I became an expert in finance and investing because I wanted to. Elon Musk is right. Study. The more books you read in a subject, the better you become. Unfortunately, most people don't study and learn anything. They would rather watch TV. They would rather, be entertained by movies and TV shows and stuff. But develop the discipline to study every day. What I discovered is, again, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, all of them. You know what they all have in common? They spend at least 5 hours a day reading and studying. And they're the richest people in the world. There's something about becoming good at what you do. And it says, see a man that is skilled in his work, he will be before kings. And so my advice to y'all is become disciplined. And if you can only study 30 minutes, start there. Become good at learning. We'll see you next week as we pick up in Proverbs 23 and we go through these 30 sayings. Goodbye.